Hi everybody, this is Lisa, and in this fun size film we'll be learning about 3 of the 6 assessment tools that you'll be learning and using in Ed 265. The easiest way to start to get to know your students as learners is to begin by looking at the information that's already on hand at your school. QM folders, talking to previous years' teachers, even talking to the students, getting basic information from them. You might as well start with what's already there. Also, think about what you can't find. If a student doesn't have a QM folder, if a student doesn't have records from previous schools, or if a student attended many previous schools, that would give you a sense of the kind of educational experiences that the student had prior to arriving at school, which will give you helpful information about the kid's background. One thing I can tell you for sure is that teachers like to use tools that are easy to implement while teaching lessons and that provide rich, useful information. So the 6 tools that we've identified for this course are those types of tools because we want you to be able to master them and use them so that you can be as effective as possible. So in a given day, as teachers, we see and hear and notice a lot of things. But sometimes students' behaviors or statements are so noticeable, they stand out, and it could be because they're surprising or significant or egregious or they perfectly encapsulate the child. And you think to yourself, oh, I will remember this forever. But in all likelihood, you're not going to remember it because 5 minutes later, you'll see other things. The day goes on, things slip by. You have to document these things when they're fresh in your mind. And this is the time when you would use a tool called an anecdotal observation or an anecdotal note. An anecdotal note would include identifying information that will make it useful to you in the future, the student's name, the date of the event, the time or the setting where it happened, a description of what happened, and what this anecdote shows about the student as a learner. For example, one of my second graders at Juvenek Elementary in Palo Alto came up to me when I was on yard duty one day, skipped up to me, of course, and said, Mrs. G, guess what? I'm wearing exciting pants. And then she skipped away. And the skipping, the singing, the desire to share her exciting pants, that was a classic Eleanor moment. And that's why I remember it. And it didn't say much about her as a learner per se, but it said a lot about her as a person. This is an anecdotal observation written by a student teacher in Texas. You can see she's got the relevant information up here and the description, and most importantly, that doesn't look good at all. I'm going to have to fix that up. Blah, 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 blah. What it reveals about the learner. Because this is where teachers' expertise and knowledge of the student comes into play. It's a critical piece of the puzzle. Another kind of tool that teachers use is documenting their conversations that they have with students. Sometimes you have questions that you can't answer just by looking at the student's behavior, at the student's work. The student has opinions and feelings and explanations, and the only way to get at those is to ask the child directly. And what makes this an assessment tool is that you document the interaction and what you learned from the conversation with the child. So it's just like a regular conversation, but it's documented for future reference. There are different ways to document a conversation. You can make a video or an audio recording if the student is comfortable with that. You can scribble down notes during the conversation. You can scribble them on a little piece of paper on your hand if that's all you have. You can also scurry away and take notes immediately after the conversation and try to capture as many details as you can. When you write up a documented conversation, you need to include the student's name, date, and the topic, your questions, and what the student responded, your thoughts about the student's responses, and then, of course, always what you learned about the child as a learner in this conversation. Here's a lovely example of a documented conversation with a kindergartner from Texas. As you can see, the student teacher documented the basics, what she said and what the student said, and I need to work on this drawing tool. Wow. Her insights were very useful and significant. The last tool in this fun size film is something that we call reflective notes. As you know, reflection is a fundamental part of good teaching. We always talk about reflection because it's part of the Jesuit perspective on education, but one of the teaching performance expectations and one of the California standards for the teaching profession focus on the critical importance of reflection in all aspects of our practice. And when you have insights or ideas or questions about your students, write them down. If you're on the treadmill and your mind is wandering and then you suddenly are thinking, wow, I wonder why Ben Quinn keeps sitting next to Jackie if Jackie keeps poking him. I wonder what's going on there. You're out walking the dog, talking to your dog about things. Sometimes you have ideas or things click when you're not looking, and a reflective note is how you would capture that. A reflective note is almost like a journal entry. You just write a date, name of the kid, and then you include all the details and elaboration and explanation. You should write the notes with enough detail that when you go back to them in 3 months or 6 months, they'll still make sense. If they're sketchy, it's not going to be helpful. And a lot of times you're writing about hunches or ideas or feelings, and if you don't capture them fully, then they'll disappear. Here's a reflective note from a student teacher from Texas, and I apologize for how squishy the text got here. And even though she calls the note Renee and Dishon, it isn't really about Dishon. It's really about Renee. So stay tuned for the next fun size film. Number 3, Gathering Data Part 2. Learn 3 new strategies. Analysis of student work samples, learning videos, and learning photos. Ready yourself for success in our course, and laugh at my awkward rambling commentary. See you in the next film.